I can't pretend Urgot was my favourite champion pre-rework, but I did have a mild fascination with him as he was such a weird but fun champion. Being totally honest, I've probably played far more of old Urgot than new Urgot, but that doesn't make me even close to being an old Urgot main at all. But what even was old Urgot? As one of the previously least played champions in the game, most players would likely shrug him off as just a useless, janky, garbage champion, forgot he existed, or even not know Urgot ever had a rework, as it's been quite a few years now. Urgot's kit was somewhere between a close range tanky bruiser and anti-carry, and a long distance sniper. Weird, I know. Urgot's passive was simply that enemies hit by his auto attacks and Q would have their damage reduced by 15% for 2.5 seconds, making him a formidable anti-carry already, and certainly something I'd love to see in Modern League if only because of how frequently players get one-shotted. Urgot's Q was a linear skill shot which hit one target for physical damage. If it hit, it restored mana. Simple enough so far. Urgot's W was a shield that, while active, caused his auto attacks and Qs to slow his targets for 1.5 seconds. Urgot's E was Noxian Corrosive Charge, back when Urgot was a champion purely from Noxus. This was an interesting ability and central to Urgot's old identity. What it did was it caused a delayed explosion in an area, and anyone hit by it would take physical damage over time and have their armor reduced by up to 20%. This also marked targets, so Urgot's Qs on enemies marked by Noxian Corrosive Charge would become homing, targeted abilities that could not be blocked like a skill shot anymore. Urgot could comfortably spam 3 Qs within the duration, and with some cooldown reduction like Black Cleaver, could squeeze in a 4th homing Q. Urgot's ultimate seemed rather out of place at the time given the kind of range his E and Q combo could make, but Urgot's R would suppress a target's enemy and then swap their positions. For 5 seconds after the initial cast, Urgot would also gain 30 to 50% damage reduction to help him after presumably diving into the enemy team with the position swap. It was strange as Urgot didn't really benefit from being up close with enemies, was fine enough shooting from afar, and overall just a really weird and out of place ultimate, but still decently strong, and you would definitely be able to have made good plays with it. Urgot builds were strange as well, at least for the time, combining Moa mana once it came out in Season 3 with tanky mana items like Frozen Heart. Different Urgot players and builds would look towards either going tanky items like Randuin's Omen, which was a much higher health item back then than it was now in Season 12, or going for damage like Last Whisper, which used to be the final form of that item instead of Lord Dominic's Regards like we have now. What was usually agreed to be an amazing item for Urgot was Black Cleaver, which was similar enough to what we have today. With each tick of Urgot's E, enemies would not only have up to 20% armor reduced by the Corrosive Charge itself, but also lose a percentage of armor each tick due to Black Cleaver. The item also gave a good chunk of AD and 20% cooldown reduction, which led Urgot halfway towards the maximum CDR at the time, which was 40%, helping him land that 4th homing Q while enemies were under his E damage over time. So what happened? Urgot was universally agreed upon to be the least popular champion in the game. Upon Sion's rework, Riot gave Sion a quote where he met with a still-to-be reworked Urgot.
So, Urgot, we can't hang out anymore. I'm cool now.
His jankiness, lack of straightforward effectiveness, and unclear gameplay strategy led players astray from him. Ezreal was a simpler and more focused and effective skillshot AD sniper at the time, and there were a whole host of good tanks for initiating and catching enemies, including the many iterations of Skarner and Vi when she was released. Urgot's rework gave him more focus, it shortened his range and buffed his up-close damage and effectiveness. A short while after the rework, the range increase on his new ultimates even gave him a sense of marksmanship and rewarded some long-range accuracy. Putting them side by side, although the abilities have been swapped around a bit, you can actually see how the old abilities translated into the new quite clearly. The new Urgot Q, Corrosive Charge, does a slightly delayed, small AoE that marks enemies, causing Urgot to lock onto them when he uses his new W. This is clearly just his old E, just made shorter range, burstier, and introduces more counterplay once locked onto. Run. The slow that Q has can also be seen as being taken from his old W. Initially, the shield remained on reworked Urgot's W, but was later moved to his E. The W allowed Urgot to rapidly barrage enemies he's locked onto, and his passive shotgun knees gave some burst and scaling to Urgot, like chunking enemies with Q in the past. Urgot's new E, that dashes towards someone and flips them behind him, is similar to swapping positions like Urgot's old ultimate. The shield that was moved to E can also be seen as similar to his old damage reduction on the R. His E also locked onto targets, giving him that close range juggernaut feel, rather than a clumsily placed marksman freak. Finally, Urgot's new ultimate may seem completely new at first, hitting an enemy and then guaranteeing them death when they reached a certain HP threshold. This inevitable demise is actually pretty similar to how it felt to be marked by Urgot's old E, and even though he's several million Teemos away from you, those homing Qs were still coming and would most certainly kill you soon enough. In a way, Urgot was preserved quite well through the rework, but that doesn't mean his playstyle was kept intact. That's an impossible task. Since Urgot was confused between being a frontline tank and a long-range marksman, Riot chose to blend them into a close-range ranged champion with juggernaut qualities, fitting his theme and bits of both of old Urgot. I can't and won't claim to have been some kind of dedicated old Urgot main before his rework and have had a once favourite champion deleted, as I really do feel the feeling of playing Urgot was preserved quite well, if only your effective range is a bit different for the most part. That said, I do actually find some moments where I do miss playing that weird janky sniper. Locking onto an enemy and shooting from afar, especially when you knew the next shot would be fatal, was a niche but very fun part of Urgot's gameplay. But it's more like a craving sense of nostalgia, as a new ultimate delivers on that feeling for me pretty well. Did you play Urgot before his rework, or has what I said intrigued you to the old version of him? Please absolutely do leave a comment below to let me know what your thoughts are on the topic. If you are interested in old Urgot, I may not have any videos on him, but a pre-rework Urgot main named Chimmelpopica has plenty of gameplay and videos on Urgot. He also did a hilariously, though sadly somewhat outdated, tank AP Tryndamere build, and a deep analysis of Steins Gate, so check out his videos for what Urgot used to be like. Thank you so much for watching, and please do consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it does encourage making more of this style of content. I do have other ideas for reworks to look at, and though I'm saving a certain one for later, I'd be happy to entertain some suggestions, so please do comment them below for that as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.